What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Better You Project, optimizing health, hormones, and aesthetics. And today I have a really awesome guest that I had the pleasure of meeting almost 2-3 weeks ago. We were at the Clinical Longevity Summit in West Palm. And that was a conference that was so great. It was put on by New BioAge, who are the makers of Gut Tides and Lucinergy and Citronol and iCell Water. And I don't know, they got a bunch of other really good stuff. But this commercial is not about them. This is about introducing someone to the Better You Project that I thought super fascinating, just a different perspective. Everyone can meet Anthony. How do you pronounce your last name?
Castore.
Castore. Perfect.
But I get everything.
Good. So Anthony has a really unique background in strength and conditioning. One of the most intriguing pieces that I had in talking with him was that he has a special interest in what they call small molecules. And so just getting down into the nitty gritty pieces of cellular medicine, which I think is really, really important if you are a prescriber and you're going to be prescribing these things. I think understanding some of the nuances to it can be helpful. And then if you're a patient, bringing some of this information to your practitioner, whether you see another practitioner in a completely different state or another practitioner within our practice, because we've got 6 of them. So I think it's great to come to the table with some education, because then not only that, you're going to be better equipped to ask questions, and then practitioners are going to be better equipped to educate. So Anthony, do you want to share a little bit about your background and how you got into this space?
Sure, absolutely. So I grew up in Indiana, actually, West Lafayette, and I was a small kid in high school. I mean, like when I graduated, I was a $117 dripping wet. And I remember I was out at a bar with my girlfriend, and she was 118 pounds. I shouldn't say this on air, but fight breaks out across the bar, and she's like joking with me, but maybe serious. She's like, "You realize, like, if that fight came over this way, I should probably be the one jumping in front." And that was kind of my impetus to start strength training. I was like, I think she's telling me to start working out. So started working out, got a great trainer. And kind of the condensed version of it is I've just really been blessed to be around people a lot smarter than me that are generous with their knowledge and time. I mentored under Charles Poliquin, was a coach at his center in Chicago, and worked and still work with Dr. Eric Serrano. I'm fascinated by medicine and kind of small molecules, as you mentioned, supplementation and the role it plays in athletics. So I just started researching that stuff way back in the 90s, and this is going to date me. I'm kind of a dinosaur. I'm 51. Really just kind of kept up with it and had the benefit of being able to follow Dr. Serrano on rounds and meet a lot of other up-and-coming doctors. And as the peptide stuff started to emerge, I was like, I've been reading about it since the 90s. Had a little interest in bodybuilding. Obviously, I picked the wrong parents, and I hated the smell of protein. So when I found out about melanotin back in the 90s, I was like, well, this could help. But fast forward, I've done every peptide certification out there, SSRP, and A4M, all the New BioAge stuff. I do private consultations with experts, and I just love learning. I'm kind of like a sponge. I just recently was the first non-medical professional accepted as into the fellowship with SSRP. So it's going to be a terrific opportunity to learn from really brilliant people and just continue to try to soak up knowledge and have something to give back.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. I think that's so cool. Now let's roll that back. Did you say you didn't like the smell of protein? Is that what you said?
I'm sorry, Protan. It's
Protan.
in the bodybuilding shows, it's like a paint you put on, and oh my gosh, this stuff smells terrible.
Okay. I was like, I didn't want to interrupt you because you were on a roll, and then I'm like, wait, what did he say? Okay, so Protan, and so then you said you switched over to melanotan 2, right? Which is so if you're listening and you don't know what that is, melanotan 2 is one of the coolest peptides that used to be around. Unfortunately, it was a peptide that got recategorized most recently. So it is through prescribers, not available to get, unfortunately. But it was a great peptide. It acts on the melanocortin receptors of the brain. It can help with increasing skin pigmentation. It also was, so when I started using melanotan 2, this was almost 6 years ago, it was before semaglutide hit the scene. I thought it was a pretty spectacular weight loss peptide as well. The only thing I didn't like about it, I don't know if you had any of this experience, is that I feel like it gave you almost like a gray, like sometimes it wasn't a pretty tan. Okay. It was like you were like a giant freckle or like a mole, and you had this like kind of gray hue to it. And what's so funny is now, having been in the peptide space, you can look at, like, in fact, we just had a speaker come from Atlanta last week, and I'm sitting next to her at dinner. I'm like, "Are you on melanotan?" She's like, "I am." Like, I can tell, so it's kind of one of those. But yes, you're right. Yeah. Melanotan is a super cool peptide that unfortunately is no longer available for prescription. Yeah. So, all right. So now that we've gotten all that, so currently you practice in Ohio, correct?
I'm in Powell, Ohio, which is a suburb of Columbus.
Okay.
And we're actually just getting our office signing the lease today, as a matter of fact, for our new office space. It's going to be Drive Longevity Solutions. Okay. And what we do out there, we're going to be using like a Pinoe device as well as InBody 970. And it's cool because when you get this biometric data, saves people from doing blood work. You can really start to kind of see how everything's working in them, areas where there's an opportunity for improvement, what's working correctly, and kind of use that as a backbone for building some of the protocols that I do for people.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that's exciting. Good stuff. So he's in the Midwest. So if you're listening and you're in the Ohio area, he'd be a great resource for you. All right. So shifting gears here. So I've got a couple little breakdowns. We're going to talk a little bit about cellular energy, breaking down 3 things in particular. First, we're going to talk about NAD. We're going to talk about another small molecule called DNF-10, and then BAM15, which is something I find super intriguing when it comes to mitochondrial health and weight loss. So first, let's jump into NAD. So Anthony, let's talk a little bit about how does NAD work in the body? And specifically, why is it important for patients who struggle with fatigue? Fatigue is one of the most common reasons I feel like we see patients in our practice, and we have a big hormone practice and optimization practice. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So NAD, a good way that I think about it is it's like a cellular currency. So if you could imagine your cells are like a bustling city, and they've got all these factories, we'll call the factories mitochondria, and they're producing energy to keep everything running smoothly. NAD is kind of like the currency. So it's how much money there is in the world, and it's essential for like the transactions. So to explain that a little bit more, kind of unpack it a little bit more, some of you might be familiar with like oxidation and redox reactions. Real cool trick to remember, like, what's that mean? Oxidation and redox is just basically giving and taking electrons. And to be a little bit more specific, the way I remember it, I need things to be simple, is oil rig. So oxidation is loss, you're losing an electron. Reduction is gain, rig. If something's essentially giving that electron to the mitochondria, it's like gasoline. It keeps gives us the energy, helps the cell run. And the NAD fuels reactions like glycolysis, which is basically just going to be the breakdown of sugar into smaller molecules for help making ATP. Also helps with the Krebs cycle. So after glycolysis, with the smaller molecules entering the mitochondria, where the Krebs cycle occurs, NAD kind of collects those electrons. It's just like gathering them up. And then also helps with the electron transport chain. Electrons are collected by NAD and then passed to the electron transport chain, which is kind of a series of proteins that are in the inner membrane of the mitochondria. Again, produces a large amount of ATP. So sort of the Cliff Notes version of all this, the simple version, is NAD is giving away electrons to give our mitochondria the gasoline or energy it needs to fuel these 3 cycles that help us create ATP, which is our primary currency of energy.
Yeah. Perfect. So a lot of times you'll hear practitioners say NAD is kind of like the powerhouses of our cells, right? So it's like kind of giving fuel to the cell, which is the fuel is the ATP and the cell is what drives it. So I think it's great. Let's talk a little bit about how are some of the forms that you recommend NAD. I know that there's lots. There's topical, there's nasal spray, there's injection, there's sub-Q. Like, what have you seen to be the most effective?
Yeah, so there's so many different things we can do to get those NAD levels up, and all of them have their advantages. You can do like an NAD IV. That's going to be most direct method, really going to dump a lot of NAD into the system. This I like for acute situations. Sometimes you have people that'll have kind of like reaction to it. And that reaction actually comes from when they have a large senescent burden. And one of the things we have to think about, like with that senescent burden, is we don't really want to be feeding those cells. And what happens with those types of cells, there's an enzyme CD38 that gets upregulated. So it makes it kind of wants to steal the NAD. So a simple thing we can do, like if that's a reaction you're getting with a NAD IV, adding in apigenin, which is just a natural supplement, like 400 milligrams, and it's going to damp down the signaling on that CD38, make sure the NAD is going to the right place. So good intervention there. You can also do like intranasal. I've used intranasal pre-workout with people to facilitate the glycolysis, give them a little bit more energy. Kind of immediately, or sub-Q is another good option for that. And then we have, when we think about kind of NAD and it getting metabolized and that whole thing, we have an enzyme, NNMT, and I won't quiz anybody on that.
Isn't it nicotinamide and methyltransferase, I believe is the
bingo.
The breakdown, right?
Correct. Yeah, that's I always stumble over that one. And what that enzyme does is basically it kind of degrades the NAD. So that NAD we would have in our system, it's just metabolizing it really fast. So when we can do things that decrease that NNMT, essentially the NAD we have available is going to be around for longer. And because we metabolize it slower, the other really cool thing about that is it's going to have a chance to kind of look at those senescent cells with the and be like, you know what? Actually, even though CD38 says I should park my car over here, I'd rather park it in a good cell. So it kind of helps direct it towards the good cells.
Good.
A couple really cool tools available for that. There's like the 1-MNA, that's kind of a newer one people have been talking about. There's 5-amino-1-MQ, and there's JBSNF00088, which also I won't quiz you guys on. And they all kind of have their advantages and different situations that they're beneficial. And then in terms of making more NAD, some supplements that are helpful is going to be like a nicotinamide riboside or nicotinamide mononucleotide. Or there's another kind of newer one. It's I'm going to butcher the name, trigelinine, and it is just basically a methylated form of niacin. So we've got different tools. Essentially, we kind of some options there. We can take NAD directly, which is going to be, boom, that's the biggest hit of it. Most effective, fastest way to get it into the system, get those energy levels up. Just be sure you're using your apigenin with that if you're doing that. We have things that can increase the production of NAD. So again, that's going to be like the nicotinamide riboside, so NR, NMN, the nicotinamide mononucleotide, and the trigylanine, and then we have things that make that NAD last longer in our system. And the three of those are going to be the 1-MNA, 5-amino-1-MQ, and JBSNF000088.
Perfect. Yeah, that's awesome. One of the common questions we get is, one, can you measure NAD levels? And there's not like a special, at least to my knowledge, not a special just blood test where it's like, like we can measure your testosterone, but we can't measure just plain NAD. It's like looking at all these other things. But some of the most common causes of NAD depletion, one of the most common is aging, right? Then the other one is inflammation. So we call it inflammation, right? So those are big things that we often check. So on our like basic blood panel on our patients, we look at thyroid, we look at hormones, we look at CBC, CMP, but we check every patient for a high sensitivity C-reactive protein. And so what I always tell them, like, it doesn't really tell me where your inflammation is. It just tells me you have some. So utilizing tools like NAD can be super helpful. Some other things that I think, are like low hanging fruit is like your basic stuff, your lifestyle stuff. So like a shitty diet can deplete NAD levels, smoking, excessive alcohol. I always say your liver is like your garbage disposal. And so if your garbage disposal is being tied up processing alcohol, it doesn't have time to process, estrogens and the adipose tissue that's releasing the toxins because now you're losing weight. Like, it can be very, very tied up in different things. Some of the other things to consider are some of the medications that can often deplete NAD levels. And I feel like this is one of those things, thinking about things like ibuprofen, Advil, Aleve, aspirin, some of the antibiotics. So I know that there is a common I want to say it's doxycycline is another one that can deplete NAD levels. And I say that because in our practice, we have women who struggle with acne, whether it's PCOS and all those things. And so I tend to feel like Accutane gets a bad rap. And I'm like, listen, Accutane is high dose vitamin A. All that doxycycline you're taking, in my opinion, is far worse than the Accutane that you could potentially take. So just some different things to consider when we're building out a really good longevity program, looking at supporting your body with NADs. Another one would be like statins. So we do a lot of Boston Heart testing in our practice, looking at ApoB levels and LP little a and ox-LDL and small dense LDL. And I can't tell you how many times, patients are they'll be on a statin and they're, we talk about mitochondrial dysfunction and things like that. And the amount of patients who struggle with like myalgias from their statins or leg cramps and things like that. So I think it's super important to understand, like, NAD is super important for the cell, for even if you are healthy, it helps with just kind of really optimizing the ATP or the energy within the cell in order to help your body do all the processes down the road, which I think is super, super important. So that's great. Yeah, that's really, really good. Let's shift gears now. Let's start digging into that DNF-10. So let's talk about what it is and why is it important.
Yeah, this is a pretty new one. Really cool peptide. So to understand DNF-10, when we think about things like bioactive peptides, it's going to fall into that category. And when we think about like how's it work, that sort of thing, it's going to be another tool that's going to help with like appetite regulation, metabolism and energy balance, and it works on the ghrelin pathway. So kind of a side note, a lot of people are doing like GHRH, GHRPs, and a lot of those signal through that ghrelin pathway. And since that's one of the things that DNF-10 modulates, one of the things to think about when we're pairing, like if this is going to be a tool that we're using for appetite suppression, when we're pairing it with like a good GHRH, GHRP, I like to use something like tesamorelin that's not going to be directly impacting the ghrelin pathway. And the other advantage to that is tesamorelin locally breaks down adipose tissue wherever it's injected. It was originally brought out as a pharmaceutical for lipodystrophy. So there can be some real cool synergy there. When we think about like the pathways and, how's DNF-10 doing its thing, the starting point is it's, and this kind of goes back to that whole like bioactive peptides. So those work by there's going to be like receptors on the surface of the target cells, and those receptors are G-coupled protein receptors. And with these receptors, basically, like when they get something like a DNF-10, that's what's going to send the signal and create like the reaction. And then when that reaction happens, what's happening there, the signaling, there's going to be the cyclic AMP pathway, CAMP pathway. There, it affects the MAPK, ERK pathway, the PI3K, AKT pathway, which a lot of people might be familiar with from hearing about like insulin. And then for its cellular response on like appetite and that sort of thing, it's involved in cell metabolism and things like adipocytes and hepatocytes. So it kind of alters the balance of like what we're breaking down for energy. It shifts it towards wanting to use fat for an energy source a little bit more than carbohydrate. So essentially, like if we were using the same amount of energy, we'll just say 100 calories, instead of it being like 100 calories coming from glucose. Now it might be like, and these are just hypothetical numbers, maybe 30 calories from glucose and 70 calories from fat. So it's kind of tilting it in that direction. So that's kind of an overview of it. Yeah, it's really cool because a lot of people that might be on a GLP-1 and have some digestive problems, probably not something they're going to run into with this. In fact, there are some kind of cool effects it can have on the microbiome. And we can talk about that a little bit too. And it also has a benefit of modulating some of the inflammatory pathways. So like IL-10, it's got a positive effect on how it modulates that. So kind of to recap, sum all that up, it's like we've got this new peptide not too many people know about, and it's something that can suppress your appetite, so kind of help with the craving controls. Paired with the right GHRH, GHRP, there could be some really cool synergy there in terms of shifting the emphasis to burning fat for a fuel, as well as now you have something that's helping build muscle. So you kind of got a double whammy there. And then also, the reducing inflammation, and then it has positive effects on GLP-1. It has positive effects on peptide YY. So it'll slow down motility a little bit, but not too much. And really just an all-around cool peptide.
Yeah. It sounds like it. So, I mean, like you just dropped so much information. So let's backtrack a little bit for listeners who are maybe not clinicians. Yeah. So we have two kind of hunger signals in our brain. We've got ghrelin, which is I'm hungry, and leptin, which is I'm full. And it sounds like DNF-10 acts on the ghrelin signals in that it lowers the ghrelin signals. And so it's lowering the hunger kind of feeling that you have. It also sounds, honestly, it sounds a little bit like AOD. I don't know if you remember back in the day, AOD peptides. But it can work more on the lipolysis part of it, fat oxidation. So it's almost got like AOD-ish type properties. It can also, it sounds like it reduces inflammation by lowering IL-6, which is great. So when we talk back to CRPs and inflammatory processes, it can be a great product for that. It sounds like this is something you would add in addition to a growth hormone secretagogue. So that would be something like your Semorelin or your Tesamorelin. Just as you said, Tesamorelin is targeting visceral adipose tissue. And so if this is working on lipolysis, this can be great in conjunction with that peptide. It also sounds like you said that you can use this also in conjunction with like a GLP-1 or maybe even like a GLP-1 GIP, maybe even an amylin analog like cagrilintide. So in recap, I think this is a great support to some of the modalities that we already use in our practice. So that sounds great. Sounds very, very promising. I was making notes as you were talking. So that's good.
Sure.
That's really, really good. Now, this one, it's not a prescription, correct?
My understanding is it's not. I believe it's derived from yeast. And another kind of bonus to it, a lot of times when it comes to peptides, a barrier to entry is going to be people are afraid to give themselves a shot or they just don't like to. Yeah. And this is actually an oral.
I was looking that up. Capsule.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Yeah. No, it's interesting. So looking through it, it looks like it's extracted from Saccharomyces cerevisiae, which we do a lot with gut health. And there's a great probiotic we use a ton in our practice that is Saccharomyces boulardii, which is made out of a brewer's yeast, which can be great as an antimicrobial. It's great as an antifungal. Yeah, that sounds super promising. That will be something that I will definitely look into trying to get that available in our practice so patients can use that in conjunction with some of their other peptide plans that they're doing. Next, shifting gear. Oh, sorry, were you going to say something?
I was just going to add that if somebody's really injection adverse and they want to do like something that's going to help with the growth hormone as well as something for appetite control, one you compare this with that's really cool is that masamerelin, and that doesn't work through the ghrelin pathway either. So another good alternative there.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, cool. All right, the next one I'm super excited about, which is why I kind of saved the best for last. Let's talk about BAM15. I think I just like the name, kind of like Fatty 15, but we got BAM15. So what is it and how does it work and why is it important? Go.
Absolutely. You know, I am so excited about this one. I started researching this like 2 years before COVID, and it's fascinating. I mean, I hardly know where to begin. If you don't mind, I'll give people a little bit of a backstory kind of about mitochondrial uncouplers and then kind of explain how they work and then talk about BAM and why I think it's greatest thing since dog's pajamas. I'd say cat's pajamas, but my bulldog's sitting here. So when we think about mitochondrial uncouplers and their history, back in 1930s, there was a compound. It was called 2,4-dinitropanel, and they used it for weight loss. And they discovered it. There were people working on the railroads, and these people were getting ridiculously shredded. And they were giving off a tremendous amount of heat, and they were getting kind of this yellowish tinge to their skin. And it turned out that 2,4-dinitropanol, which people call, or DNP as it's known, is absorbed through the skin. And they ended up turning this into a weight loss medication. And it was something you just go in, doctor would give you, and weight would just come up. I mean, it increased your metabolism by 150%.
Sign me up.
It's crazy, right? And with the DNP, people were getting good results, but the problem is it deposits in like a lot of different tissues. So it's, in terms of half-life, it's kind of like ketamine in that when you look at the half-life, it doesn't accurately represent how long that compound's going to be active in your system. And it works through a positive feedback loop. So as your body's creating heat, it creates more heat. And that would kind of perpetuate. And people, with that more is better mentality were literally cooking themselves from the inside out. So you can imagine that one got yanked. And the way that it worked was it's a mitochondrial uncoupler, and I'll explain that so it makes a little bit more sense. But kind of an interesting side note, they've actually brought DNP back. They're studying it right now for cancer and Huntington's disease. But with this BAM15, it's also a mitochondrial uncoupler, and I'll kind of explain what that is. So trying to think where to begin. when you think about like these protons kind of crossing like the mitochondrial membrane and bypassing ATP synthase, that's like an uncoupling action. And that's going to allow the mitochondria, it's going to burn more fuel like fats to kind of maintain proton gradient. And then, so essentially, the simple version of that is that it makes your body less efficient at making ATP. And because it has to work so hard, just like if we work really hard, we get hot when we're moving around. It creates a lot of heat, and that heat gets dissipated. So basically, yeah, what we have is something that is uncoupling, and through that uncoupling reaction, creating heat, and through the creation of heat and thermogenesis, burning a tremendous amount of calories. Now, if we think about kind of where we're at right now in terms of, so what's all this mean? How do we apply it in the practical stuff? When we think about something like cancer, what's happening is cancer has kind of taken over the cell, and it's metabolizing glucose at like this really, really rapid rate. And what if we were to be able to pull the rug out from under it, and all of a sudden, it's like, shoot, I thought I had this whole pathway thing figured out. I don't know how to metabolize this glucose anymore to keep myself growing. So essentially, you're starving the cancer cells, and you're giving that limited amount of energy to the good cells, so they can have a defense against it. Also, when we think about mitochondrial uncouplers, because of the amount of fuel, fat, carbohydrates that it takes to create that ATP that our body needs, things like fatty liver. So we start to pull fat, out of the liver. So things like NASH, there's potential therapeutic value to this. And then, of course, me being a meathead through and through, my interest in it is really kind of the fat loss side of it. And it is tremendous, the amount of fat loss you can see with this. With the BAM, what's unique about it is they've found a way to, well, I guess maybe comparing and contrasting BAM and DNP will make it make a little bit more sense. So both of them are mitochondrial uncouplers, and they both disrupt the whole oxidative phosphorylation. BAM's mechanism, what it does, it also shuttles protons across the mitochondrial membrane. And it's got a little bit different structure. So that allows it to be a lot more selective. So instead of these like big drastic membrane potential things going on with DNP, where like just that excessive amount of heat is created, BAM is doing the same kind of uncoupling, but it's not creating that ridiculous amount of heat. In fact, N of 1, when you take BAM, it's not uncommon like not to sweat. And if you've ever taken DNP and you're used to like the kind of the sweat that comes with it, it's almost like, man, is this thing working? They've studied it right now primarily in animals, and they haven't found a tolerable upper limit. So that's basically saying kind of the opposite of DNP in the sense that it doesn't look like there's a toxicity with it, better safety profile. So now we've got this tool, and it's oral also. So it's something that you could basically take like in a capsule form or something along those lines. So no injections or anything. And basically we have this tool that we could take for like 10 days, and it's going to shed off fat, potentially starve cancer cells, reduce any type of NASH going on. And another huge benefit, and this kind of ties into our discussion on how do we create more energy, it actually creates mitochondrial biogenesis, which is going to be creating like more mitochondria. So we have more power plants in the cell to do our thing with. So that's kind of the overview. I know I just kind of vomited a lot of
That's
information
okay.
there.
It's
So
good. It's good. Okay. So I'm going to do a little recap for the common folk like myself who I just like bring it down a notch as far as
sure.
the science piece of it. So from my understanding, BAM15 works specifically on the uncoupling process of changing of protons. And what it also does specifically is it increases, and I talk to patients about this a lot, is something we call NEAT, right? Non-exercise activity thermogenesis. So thermogenesis is the process to which your body is burning fat, really at rest kind of thing. So one of the big things I always say is that when you lose muscle, you will burn less calories because muscle burns more calories at rest. It increases your thermogenesis, right? So it sounds like this BAM15 also does that, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, I'm really sad that MOTS went away because I always say that's like exercise in a bottle. It kind of sounds like BAM15 is a little bit like that in that it can increase AMPK and it can increase thermogenesis and it can also improve mitochondrial dysfunction, which MOTS was an awesome mitochondrial peptide. So I would say, is that it's like the Reader's Digest version of what you said?
That is so much better. That is a perfect explanation. Specifically, like when we think about our uncoupling proteins, it works on uncoupling protein 1, and that's going to be those same type of reactions happen in like brown adipose tissue.
Mm-hmm.
So like when we hear about like brown fat versus white fat and that kind of thing. And kind of a cool side note, when we think about like, how do we build on this platform that's BAM15 to improve our mitochondria even more? This is where it gets really cool, but I'm happy to unpack that a little bit more. You did a beautiful job of explaining that.
Sure.
Makes a ton of sense and really appreciate it. I sometimes get
it's hard. I get it because when you talk it all day, you're like, well, don't you know what PGC1 alpha is? Like it's like,
Yeah.
But again, keeping in mind the listeners we have on this podcast, a lot of them are patients, and so I think sometimes it's like, what is she talking about? And okay, so what does this mean? So if you're a patient, BAM15 is good for helping your bodies burn more calories at rest, reducing inflammation, great for mitochondrial dysfunction, good for fatty liver, good for insulin resistance. So thinking about your A1C, thinking about elevated levels of inflammation, elevated insulin levels. I think it's great. I think that's really, really good. Is there anything else?
Yeah. So when we think about these uncouplers, what can we do to, one, of course, make them safe, and two, really get the most out of them and benefit our mitochondria? There's going to be some synergy with some peptides, some nutrition supplements, some devices, as well as other molecules, and some things that, from nutrition supplement standpoint, that are really beneficial to throw in with it would be like your coenzyme Q10, and alpha lipoic acid, N-acetylcysteine, and MitoQ. Those work tremendously with it. Those help to kind of keep down some of the oxidative stress that's going to be produced from those reactions. With peptides, they did kind of yank MOTS away, but we've got a really cool one coming, CB4211. And that is actually kind of a derivative of MOTS. It looks like it's even got more therapeutic impact in terms of things like NASH or kidney disease. So that's one you could pair with it. SS31, which works on the inner membrane of the mitochondria, is another really good one to put with it. And then you have things like you can do acetyl L-carnitine. You could do like an IV of ICAR, AICAR. And you can do something like methylene blue to kind of give you an idea of like exactly like how I do it. So it would be like BAM15 and methylene blue, 20 minutes exposure to a red light panel, along with the aforementioned antioxidants, and then SS31 as a peptide. And then I add in, you could either do like a sub-Q, NAD plus, or what I personally do is 5-amino 1-MQ with 1-MNA. So I do the 5-amino 1-MQ in the morning, 1-MNA in the afternoon, and take apigenin, the 400 milligrams before I go to sleep, because it actually helps with sleep too and reduces that CD38. And if you put that cocktail together, man, I'm telling you, about 8 weeks on that, you're going to have all these new mitochondria. You're going to have amazing energy. Fat melts off. So my fiance will keep me around if we go to the beach, and it is really a pretty awesome combo.
Yeah, no, that sounds fantastic. That's really, really, really cool. So I think I've just wrote down all my notes, looking at my show notes here. I think we've covered just about everything that we want to do. If people want to follow you, where can they find you?
Absolutely. So I'm on Instagram. It's just at Anthony Castore. Currently, my webpage is actually being built for Drive, kind of revamping that. I've got a webpage up right now that's outdated. I have not posted anything on it or touched anything on there. So when the Drive one comes out, Drive Longevity Solutions.
Okay.
And then in Powell, Ohio, if you guys are ever in the Columbus area, love to talk to you guys. I go to pretty much all the conferences and educational events. So if you ever see me there, please stop me, talk to me. I mean, I can ramble on all day about this stuff. I love it.
Yay, yay. All right. Well, we'll be sure to tag your Instagram, because you do put out a lot of really good content on there. And then this will probably go live. Your website might be up by the time this goes up live.
Oh, excellent.
October? November. So you got till
Perfect.
November to get your website, all that together. So thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy schedule to hop on here and talk about some of these really cool small molecules. You know, it's been a bit of a struggle with the recategorization of some of our favorite peptides. And so it's allowed some of us nerds the opportunity to think outside the box and really kind of get into some of the cellular pathways and seeing how some of the similarities, like, you know, BAM15 and MOTC, and kind of how you can pair and stack these together. And that, you know, recently there's been, and this will air in November. So when I say recently, we're like August. You know, there has been some letters that have come out to med spots, and it's about compound semaglutide, which I'm not getting into that. But I kind of go back and I think, and it's like, if compound semaglutide wasn't around, would you have a weight loss program? Right? And so this is where understanding, really as a practitioner, leveling up and understanding how does this work on a cellular pathway basis is what's going to help you not only help and serve your patients, it's going to help them troubleshoot when they hit weight loss plateau or life changes. And not only that, should unfortunately things change and patients no longer have access to certain peptides, what can we use in its place? And so I think it's allowed some of us to be very innovative in stacking some of these different tools. So I think it's great. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me on here. Full disclosure, I am a fan of your podcast. So getting the opportunity to be on here is really an honor. And I appreciate what you do. I've learned a lot from you, and absolutely loved your presentation down in West Palm the other week.
Thank you. Thank you.